Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where Executive Coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hi there, leaders. It's Alicia Cowan, and happy New Year. It is now the 9th of January as I'm recording this, and I can't believe how fast the end of the year went. And I feel like I haven't talked to you in a while. There's been so much that has happened since I've recorded the last episode. So much to fill you in on. And I hope you had an amazing New Year and holiday season. So depending on when you're listening to this, you may be in the midst of getting ready for performance review season. I've had a lot of you reach out and ask about performance reviews and delivering some tough feedback. And so that is what we're going to talk about today, really centering around the crafting of the performance review and the delivery of the performance review. So I want to give you a little bit of a crash course in that topic. And so, of course, though, I have to give you a personal update about what has been going on around the Cowan household, as I normally do during the beginning of this podcast. So, big news. We are officially in the house. So if you haven't been following, we're working on building a house for the past 2 years in the Wesley Chapel area, and we are officially in. And we closed on the 19th of December. We got our house goods delivered about 2 days later after they were in storage for 2 years, and started unpacking a little bit and got settled in. And our first night actually spending the night in the house was on Christmas Eve, 12/24. And then we woke up on Christmas Day in the house, and it was the best Christmas present ever to just be home officially. So it was great. And we had some friends and family in town, and it, really forced us to kind of get ready for them and having company right away. And we just celebrated and had a really great time. It was just so much fun. And so now we are slowly getting back to it and settling into the house, and the kids are back to school tomorrow. So getting back in the routine. And so just loving it. And so if you are curious, if you're listening to this on some platform that's not YouTube, if you're really curious, I am on YouTube, and you can get a sneak preview of The Office, because I'm filming today and recording in the office for the first time. So you can get a little bit of a preview. So I want to give a shout out to a listener. And I talked to someone recently who listens to the podcast and really dug into the topic of difficult conversations. And I recorded, a couple of different episodes that relate to difficult conversations, but really talked about wanting to get better at difficult conversations, and particularly around challenging performance and holding people accountable for their performance in the workplace. And this listener talked about just getting very emotional and taking it very personally when delivering these conversations and talking through performance. So this is inspired by her. And so we're going to talk through performance reviews. And I want to give her a shout out because she had the humility and the awareness and self-awareness to be aware of what she needed to do in order to grow and move to the next level of leadership that she wants to be at. So she's actively working on these things. And so this is for her. So like I mentioned, we are going to dive in and talk about performance reviews. And a little bit of history with me. I have been managing people for over 23 years now, and I have worked in the HR space for a couple decades now. And so not only have I had to continue to deliver and write and craft my own performance reviews, I've also had to be behind the scenes from the HR standpoint and understand the systems and the processes and all of the things that go into performance reviews, as well as help coach leaders that are also delivering and writing performance reviews themselves. So I've had to look at it from lots of different angles and not only, again, do it myself, but also teach, coach, train others on how to do it. So I have a unique perspective from that background. And then being a coach myself, have the objective point of view to kind of look at these performance reviews and how to do them. And so I'm going to take that perspective and break it down for you to help you demystify, hopefully, performance reviews and get a couple practical tips in there too. So let's start off with the why. Why do we even do performance reviews in the first place? Well, I'll tell you. So, I think about it and I tell people this all the time when we're thinking about performance reviews. A lot of times people dread doing performance reviews, both in the business and on the HR side, realistically. It feels like such an administrative burden at times. And, quite frankly, sometimes it can be. But I think if we can strip it back and really understand, like, why the heck do we even do them in the first place? It can help, again, demystify it and keep it really simple. And quite simply, if you have big objectives, and a lot of you do, big objectives and goals that you're trying to hit as a collective business and a collective company, then having great conversations with each individual about how they're contributing to the objectives and how they're contributing to the KPIs that we're measuring to hit these objectives is crucial. And so the whole point of performance reviews is to deliver amazing feedback around where each associate stands in terms of contributing to the overall goals. It's that simple. And so there are a lot of HR mechanisms put into place to do this. And really the back end of it, the HR mechanisms, so like the process and the milestones and the forms and all that stuff, it really just puts into place a way to formalize the process for feedback. It's a way to track it. It's a way to, march towards consistency, that everybody's delivering it at the same time in the same way because of the form, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I say that because I want you to know that ultimately the whole point is to make sure that each associate is getting the feedback that they need to understand where they are in relation to their goals and the bigger business and where the company is headed. That's it. And so if you can understand that, I think you can grasp and gather that, like, your role in this is critical, because as a leader, you not only have to think about what makes sense to give to this associate, but also, again, where they play into the bigger business. And a lot of you as senior leaders are also thinking about the organization or your entire department and your broader org. Again, am I helping to point all the arrows in the right way? Because if you're not organized in what the goals are, what the mission is, what you're trying to achieve, and you're not sharing with the team how they're doing in relation to that, then you have everybody kind of going in all these different directions and not focused on trying to achieve the same things together. Okay. So again, your role in this is so critical. So I know sometimes it's like, oh, it's performance review season time. There's just this collective groan across the organization. But I think quite simply, remember that the feedback is so critical for associates to know where they stand. And the risk of not doing it, on the flip side, I've heard it and seen it. Without the direct feedback, employees have no idea where they stand in relationship to their goals. They don't know how they're doing. They don't know where they're headed. There's not accountability for the people that aren't doing and holding up their end of the bargain. And a lot of times it can lead to disengagement. And not only for that person to be unengaged in their role, but also for others. If others are working harder and hitting their goals and their objectives, and they see somebody that's not, and that person's not being held accountable for it, they get frustrated. And ultimately, again, so if we're thinking about everybody hitting the goals and objectives of the company, without that direct feedback and without clarity, it's going to hinder the growth of the entire org and the team. So there's a lot of upside in it. So let's dig in. If that's hopefully a compelling why, let's dig in and start to talk about it and what it can look like for you. All right. So let's start off with a little bit of the coaching aspect and the mentality that I'd like to think about as you go into performance reviews. I talk a lot about your leadership style being really important as the foundation and North Star of being a senior leader. And so I'd like to start here. As you think about performance reviews, you can start with your thoughts around your leadership style, and then it'll help shape how you want to go about it. So ask yourself the question, how do you want to show up as a senior leader during the performance review process? And you might think things like, I want to be on the same page as my direct reports. I want to be known as someone that is great at communicating performance review feedback. I want to be inspiring. I want to be motivating. I'd like to show up as being someone that's very clear and direct and transparent with my feedback. At the same time, maybe compassionate and supportive. What are those things for you in terms of your leadership style and your North Star? And then set this as the foundation. Then you can look at the lens of everything that you do around performance reviews using some of these North Star phrases. Another easy way to think about it is how you don't want to show up. A lot of times I'll ask this question about the best review feedback you've ever gotten and the worst. And a lot of times people will go to the way that they don't want to show up. And that can be things like, I don't want to be afraid of delivering tough feedback. I don't want to be unaligned with my direct report. I don't want to be uncomfortable in discussing feedback. And I mentioned with my listener, I don't want to get overly emotional when I'm delivering tough feedback. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to think of the flip side. So maybe that helps you when you're thinking about it. But have those thoughts in mind, and then we can dive into the tactics. Because without the mindset, none of the tactics really matter. You have to have the right mindset going into it. And then we'll dive into a little bit more tactical next. So I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when even the performance review process is even mentioned, there's like this, again, collective groan across the organization. And why? Why do we think performance reviews suck so bad? Well, quite simply, a lot of times it is just so hard to remember everything that happened over the course of a year when we're sitting down to write a performance review. And we'll sit down and we'll open up that form and look at that performance review, and we just like draw a blank. We don't know where to start. We don't know what to write. Or at times it sucks because we have to deliver this performance review rating and summarize, a year's worth of performance into one rating, one overall rating. And, perhaps our direct report disagrees with that rating and wants to challenge rating, or maybe our boss disagrees with how we're evaluating performance on our team. And another challenge can be when we get to the point where we're trying to summarize feedback and we haven't been consistent with feedback throughout the year, and we haven't had some of the tough conversations with direct reports that we need to have. And then so all of a sudden at the end of the year, there's this like atomic bomb of feedback that we drop on the person, and it can be a lot. Another time, we're just getting in our own way when we think about performance reviews. We want to be nice or be liked. We don't want to confront people. We don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. And we think things like, well, we want to reward people because maybe they have a lot of tenure, or maybe they've worked really hard. Even if the results aren't there, they've had a lot of hard work. Or maybe I've heard things like, their personal situation was really tough outside of work. And so there's all these little things that come into play that make review writing really challenging. So let's talk, before we get into this review writing, let's talk about like mitigating some of these challenges. So I'll say this, a great way to start, and again, depending on where you're listening to this and depending what time of year, is that you can start to really build great habits now. And what I really love to do is not wait. Build really great performance feedback habits by starting to take notes somewhere. I love OneNote personally. things like Google Docs, or it can be a hard copy notebook, whatever it may be, but taking really great notes based on what's happening in your one-on-ones or week to week, and take great notes on performance review feedback. And doesn't mean you have to deliver all of that at once, but take great notes as you're going throughout the year. And then communicate on regular cadences. Again, talking to your direct report, but also your boss, your colleagues, and ask like how you generally think their performance is going, your direct report's performance is going. You can do this for yourself as well. And then really with the uncomfortable conversations, the more you're practicing this throughout the year and getting comfortable with the discomfort, you can decide, again, going back to that leadership style and that foundation of who you want to be as a leader. If you want to be clear and direct, getting comfortable with it as you go through the year is going to really help you when it comes to the end of year performance feedback. Okay. So let's transition now. So that's a couple of ways to mitigate the suck. And we're going to go through and talk about some tactics when you're getting ready to sit down and write that review. So quite simply, it's really easy to just go get the data, right? So when you're sitting down, it's like gathering this data. If you've really been diligent about taking notes, grab your notes from wherever you've been taking notes, get the results from projects, any KPIs, reporting, anything you need. And you also can consider, do I need anybody else's input on this? Any coworkers, supervisor, et cetera, to get a little bit of feedback for this direct report. That's first, gather that information. Second, go into the form. So go into the performance review form, into the systems, and take a look at it. Go through all of the things that you need in order to get ready. So the form, taking a look at it, reminding yourself what it looks like, the rating scale, the metrics, the objectives, all that good stuff. Put all those deadlines and milestones onto your calendar so you know what you need to hit and when. And then you can block some time to write reviews. And this is important. I think people try to squeeze it in at the last minute. Trust me, as someone who's been in HR, watching people complete performance reviews for years, most of the writing happens in the last 48 hours of them being due. So I see you. I know what you're doing. But to write a good quality performance review, if you can plan it and block it on your calendar, even better. And then you can get ready to write after you have all these things in place. Okay. Now for the fun part. If you've got yourself prepared properly, then writing the draft of the review is so much easier. So let's dive into that piece of it. So a couple of very tactical things that you can do here. You want to consider starting with the big picture. That's why I had you go into the review form first, is to be able to get the lay of the land, but not start to jump in and write it. So you have kind of those forms in mind, but really you want to not start the draft there. Start with either electronic setup, but I love to do just a big old blank piece of paper or a whiteboard or whatever your kind of physical writing tool of choice is, and really start really big picture. Start from the 30,000 foot view. When you think about this individual, think about how was their performance over the course of the year? What comes to mind? What's top of mind for you? And again, you want to avoid this sort of recency bias. So that's why it's kind of great to get quiet and think about key moments over the past year. And then start to draft that on paper. What were some of the headlines? If this person were to walk away from the review conversation, what are the main takeaways that they should remember? And so max this out at 2 or 3. And you want to start, again, bottom line up front. What do they need to walk away with, knowing with certainty? Okay. And so some of those key points really, really help when you start thinking about the overview for the review. One very great template that I like to use is actually, and again, I'm showing this on YouTube, but there's this little notepad. from Ink and Volt. I'll link it in the show notes. But I have no affiliation to them, but I just love this little template where it's a feedback template. And at the top, it has an entire blank space for observations is the first bucket. And so what I like to do is draw the person's name in the middle, write the person's name in the middle of a piece of paper. And you can do this on a blank piece of paper. Totally fine. Don't need the form. But draw the person's name in the center and then start to do a written mind map. And if you don't know what that is, it's where you write down, you're brainstorming typically, but you write the topic in the middle. And then off to one side, I like to start to think of all the positive feedback, all the recognition, all the great things that have happened that I want to make sure is a part of this. And I start to draw that from, again, so those big questions on how was their year. On the other side, I like to think about what areas of opportunity, growth, development that they still need. What are some of those things that will take them to the next level? What do they need to grow? Where do they need to skill build? What are those things that I want to call out to them as a part of this review? And so then I've got these great ideas at the top. On this particular form, it's great because it's outlining feedback. It has wins. It has 3 listed. What's their success and progress? It has a list for opportunities. What's the growth and development needed? What's the bottom line? What's the key theme or sentiment that we want to leave them with? And then the plan of action listed at the bottom. So again, you can do this on your own, or you can link it in this great little form. It's so helpful to use. But that's where you can really start to frame up this review. Then you can drill down. As you've now looked, at this view of 30,000-foot view of the feedback, their year, you can then start to drill down and list out some specific examples that tell the story of their year. So if some of the highlights, are there written out, what are some of the specifics that happened that you can call out? Same thing with opportunities. What is some specific feedback that you can give and list out some examples that will help tell the story and back up this overarching theme and sentiment that you want to leave them with? Okay. Then at this point now, then you have this great brain dump that you can now take and go back into the review form and then start to take the feedback, start to take the messaging and put it into the review form and match up the metrics and the examples that are going to back up these ratings that you're going to put in. Again, I find this really helps me when I'm trying to think about how to write a review, rather than just jumping into the review form and starting. And I know this has helped a lot of my clients and people that I've worked with to help them write reviews rather than just jumping into the form. Because sometimes we get in there and it's like a deer in headlights. So try that. It might work for you too. All right, let's move on to actually having the conversation. So we've, again, thought about our leadership style. We've thought about the review, we've drafted this review, and now it's time to dive into this conversation. We're going to talk about this difficult conversation as it relates to the performance review, but I also have a couple episodes talking about delivering tough feedback, having difficult conversations. Episode 12, 18, and 27 are all good ones to refer to if you want to really dive deep into difficult conversations. So let's talk though specifically about this performance review. So when you're getting ready to deliver the review, you've drafted it, you're ready, and you're thinking about the conversation, what I'd like to recommend is to go back to that draft where you wrote down the headlines and use this to start to build your agenda for the conversation. Again, asking the question, what message do you want to resonate with the associate? If they could walk away with just a couple key notes and a couple key messages, which ones are they? And getting really crystal clear in those so that you are prepared for them to hear you and really have those sink in, rather than having just a ton of information and they're not necessarily sure what to walk away with. All right. The second question is great to answer in helping to prepare this agenda is, what questions do you anticipate needing to answer from them? And where I'd like to go with this too is to think about this associate. and think about it through the lens of somebody that maybe is a top performer. And so how do you manage a high potential top performing associate, and what might they need from you? Same thing, an associate that is meeting expectations, someone that's doing a good job, but has some room to improve and be great. Again, nothing's going wrong here, but they're meeting expectations and have some room to grow. And then third, if you have somebody that's underperforming, that's the toughest conversation in terms of being really clear and having a lot of clarity. What do they need to hear? And considering those messages, and then what questions might they have for you? Okay. So once you've considered that, then you can start to think through the conversation. So a couple of tips here around delivering the review and the feedback formula that you'd like to use is, one I like to use is recommending that as a supervisor, you start with I. And you can read a lot of different information on having tough conversations out there, and really starting with I. There's a lot of evidence backs up. It says, I've noticed, I've seen, and I'm concerned with is less, I guess, confrontational, let's call it, than using you. And so really starting with I and what you've seen as a supervisor. So here's what I've seen, here's what I've noticed, here's what I've been made aware of, etc. Secondly, another great tip is to discuss then the impact of what you've seen. And what some cues or tips you can use is what impact it's had on the team, what impact that it's had on the broader business or the company, what impact it might have had on their career, etc. Okay. So really, again, it's the why. Why is this important, and what impact is it having? And then third, once you've delivered this feedback, here's what I've seen, here's the impact it's having, then you get curious on their perspective. So asking questions. What do you think about this? What's your thoughts? Some really great open-ended questions to get their take on this. This is a big one that I see leaders skip because we sometimes are so uncomfortable with having these conversations. A lot of times we just go in wanting to get the information out as fast as possible and not pausing to get the other person's perspective. So this one's really important. So getting their take on things. Okay. Then once you've had this dialogue back and forth, giving your feedback, them giving their thoughts, and then you come to an agreement. Okay. Even if you don't necessarily agree, you may agree to disagree on some of the feedback, you do have to make agreements on what are the next steps to move forward. What do we agree to do together as a team? Lastly, then you agree to revisit the conversation at some point. So you can use your one-on-ones to revisit this feedback, revisit the progress on the actions that you committed to, and continue this conversation. Of course, this is after you close out the review, but noting at the end of the conversation that you are going to commit to move forward and you're going to commit, this is going to be part of the ongoing conversation, really opens the door so that, again, you can continue these conversations, putting the feedback into a part of your regular cadence and flow between you and your direct report, and just normalize it. Make performance feedback normal. Okay. And I promise you, the more you practice this, it's like going to the gym and working at a muscle. It may be painful every single time, may not want to do it, may not be great while you're there, but afterwards, it is so worth it to build up these muscles. And I'll tell you, I coach leaders at all different levels and in all different types of organizations and all different types of backgrounds. And this is one skill that runs so consistently throughout, because who you're giving feedback to and how you are delivering it continues to be a part of your career. If you're going to continue to grow to be a senior leader, promise you, this is going to be a part of it. And if you avoid it, again, I've heard a lot of conversations that have been avoided, and they end up being really detrimental to the organization and to you as a leader, because you're not allowing for that growth, not only for the person that's receiving the conversation, but for you as the senior leader that is delivering it. All right. So that's what I have for you. I hope this is helpful. As you know, at again, time we're recording this, it is mid-January, and a lot of you are closing out the calendar year of performance and you're getting ready to head into the performance review cycle. However, if you are listening to this at any other time of the year, still so helpful because we are always teeing up for having great feedback conversations. And when you get to the end of the year, it should not be a surprise. So some of these conversations can absolutely happen throughout the year. As always, like I said, I am coaching clients on this currently. And if you need help with it, if you are struggling with how to deliver some tough feedback, if you are struggling with how to write a great performance review, or if you need training, I'm also doing group coaching for teams on writing and delivering great performance reviews. So if you need help with any of that, I am so happy to help you. You can reach out to me on my website. It's Alicia Cowan Coaching. It's ELISIAKEOWN coaching.com. We can totally schedule a call. Let's talk through what's the challenge ahead of you, and we can talk about how we can address it together. You're not alone in this, and it's totally normal. It's one of the most common things that I talk about. So I am so glad that you've listened, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great couple of weeks. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.